I've been wanting to talk with David Galbraith for years. I read his book Unleashing Greatness, years and years ago. And it was a real game changer for me in terms of how I thought about success and some of the tools and things I did with my athletes to try and create success for them. And some of those things I put into place had a huge effect on my athletes. David's a high performance coach, a mindset coach for some of our greatest athletes. He has been in four Olympic cycles, working at the absolute highest echelon of sports. Not just with individual athletes, but he's worked with New Zealand Sevens teams, the Chiefs, when they won two titles within Super Rugby. He's worked within netball. And speaking recently with two of our international athletes, they called him an absolute epic human being and someone who had the biggest effect on them and their performance. Interestingly, some of the stuff he talks about has nothing to do with sport, and that's what I love. He knows what creates success, and he helps his athletes chase that with some hard questions around what they're doing in their life. So if you want to know about what will create success for your athlete, what you can do as a parent that really brings about successful, healthy, balanced individuals who can really reach their dreams, listen to this next chat. It's a great one. Enjoy. David Galbraith, super excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, mate. Thank you, mate. Thank you very much. I'm real privileged to be here. I love having these conversations and especially about young people and sport.
Absolutely. And look, I'm going to dive right in. We are called the Game Changer Podcast. What do those words game changer mean to you?
Well, the first thing I thought when I saw the title of what you've named you guys in the podcast is it's that opportunity to consider new things. Because I do believe that when you change a game plan or shift things around, it's a big challenge because you've more than likely done things a certain way for a long time or done things without thought for a long time. And so to bring a new way of doing things, I think straight away is a courageous thing. And so straight away when I think about that term, I'm like, yeah, I love the philosophy and I love the what it brings up for me and all that phrase means. There's so many layers to it, eh? Like
100%.
it's the opportunity to experience life or the game in a completely different way. Like if we take it specifically to the sporting moment, it's a shift in momentum. It's a change in game plan. It's a change in the way that people do their roles and hold their responsibilities. So I guess there's the physical immediate level for me, and then people's lives and decision making about rest and recovery and training and approach and perspective of sport and coaching and success and failure. So there's lots of layers off that, and but I just love the way it makes me think. It's good. I like seeing that. Yeah, so that's what would probably come up for me.
Brilliant. And I think as we go through life, I think we have certain people who become game changers for us. And sometimes it's an experience. Do you have a person or a specific moment that's been a really game-changing moment for you and I guess in your life or your career?
There's a couple come up. I was very fortunate to be employed or mentored by a beautiful man, and when I was about 18, and he was a creative energy that lived outside the norm within the rural district that I grew up in, and was a farmer, but was a very alternative farmer. And I believe that that was quite a profound influence on me at 18 years old to see someone that didn't hold to the way of the mass, didn't care the community saw him as a little bit eccentric. He lived a life of adventure as well as hard work, very courageous and would be very happy to try new things, very considered and calculated, so never spontaneous and stupid. And he really helped me understand the difference between courage and stupidity as a plan.
Interesting.
And I reckon that's a really powerful one that I've brought through right through in the way that I support people is if we've got a plan, it's a really powerful intervention of courage. And so that I think that for me is a really key part that he I was able to see in him in a way that he brought to life. And a reality which was serious. It was about money, and it was about investments, and it was about moving from farming and the tried and true, I guess, in his own generations of family farming, and really did sail to the wind. Like he got off the trade winds and decided he was going to track away from the safe and the encouraged, I guess, and that he was key. And then later on, I reckon Tony Robbins was probably a key influence as well. As crazy as it sounds in the way that he operates, there's some really powerful foundation that he set for me about the way I embrace fear.
Yep.
And then, I was fortunate to be training as a psychologist at that time too. But really, I think he would be a key figure in that time I was training as a clin psych to look, look at what I was learning, not just learn it. And that's when my relationship with fear really shifted and moved away from being the enemy um, to an energy source, which is like, I call it weapons grade uranium, man. It's like the most powerful source of energy that if we make it our friend, and that was what Tony Robbins was really encouraging, was not so much making it your friend, but he really encouraged a new perspective of it. Um,
And was some
I,
of that having to like you're training as a clinical psychologist, so you're probably teaching some of the stuff and you've probably done
mm,
the
mm,
theory, but was some
mm.
of that actually you got to go live it yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I found that the most powerful process over time, I guess, and what I've done over the years has been integrity.
Yep.
Not what I know. It's more, it's quietly trying to make the best by my own life and learning as I go through my own process. So I'm never asking an athlete to do or a coach to do anything that I haven't done myself or considered myself or researched through, proper research on what does and doesn't work, and then also applied it to understand it. And I think that's the really key part is that I understand what I ask people to do in that book.
Yep.
I've lived that book for 20 years. The fact that it actually helped other people was really cool. And so it was definitely, as you say, for me, the integrity part is massive. It's so important. Mm,
Yeah, absolutely.
mm,
Hey, like you've already mentioned fear a couple of times,
mm,
and courage is this theme that goes all the way through your work. I
mm,
think one of the things you say in your book that there is a secret to success,
mm,
and it's courage.
mm,
And you also mentioned that it's probably the most important emotion for you to learn to control. Um,
absolutely.
and and you mentioned that it unleashes your mind, and again, it can help you achieve potential. Can you dig into that a little bit for us?
Yeah, there's so many layers to that as a conversation to help parents and athletes alike see and understand that.
Yep.
And so often people will come and ask me to help people with self-doubt or performance anxiety or fear of failure. And the bit I want them to understand is that psychologically, courage is the trigger to pride. And then pride is a natural process that again, this is just from years of reflecting on this stuff and being immersed in it, is that there seems to be a domino effect that happens in the mind that once pride is triggered, you have a view of yourself which is quite positive. And then if you have a view of yourself that's positive, your ambition seems to be triggered, that there's possibility about what you could do. And as soon as you've got ambition, you get a little bit of enthusiasm sort of simmering away. And that's when you start to think about some big dreams or some big possibilities. And if you're surrounded by some good mentors or a good coach at that point and put a plan in place, that's when the magic really starts to happen. And then belief and confidence sort of comes off the evidence of action, not I don't see it sort of come pre-action. It sort of feels like it's belief and confidence is an experiential based um, result, not you can think yourself positive and you can sort of give yourself good self-talk.
Yep.
But it's not until you've really danced with a dragon that you find that you're feeling like you're ready to jump out the plane.
So Nike got it right when they said just do it.
Yeah, but I hope that they also meant that there's a plan underneath it.
Yep.
Because there is again that I'm just doing it off no plan. I see a lot of youngsters with GoPros on YouTube really being quite silly, and I imagine there's some terrible accidents and bits and pieces from young people just not having a plan. Probably old people too. Um, so that understanding that sequence from pride to self-belief and confidence is really important because the trigger to pride is courage. So if we can understand what the psychology process is in the mind and how that works, you then understand that I don't have to help my youngster feel brave or, sorry, courageous, sorry, confident or self-belief, which often parents want me to help them with, because that's the end of the chain. That's the end of the domino effect.
Yep.
They can just leave all of that alone and help them be brave, create opportunities for them to be courageous, and then that will trigger pride. Because that's also an innate psychology too, is that when we behave in a brave, courageous way, we automatically feel pride, regardless of the outcome. So that sequence is really, really important. But there is also a mirror sequence, which is shame.
Yep.
So I look at pride and shame probably as the two fundamental emotions. Courage triggers pride. And I know this is a loaded term, but cowardliness triggers shame.
Yep.
So when we run away from our problems, run away from our challenges, don't say what we feel we should say or do what we know we should do because we're afraid of some sort of outcome. And I'm not talking a trauma-based outcome. So if someone's had a terrible time and they're afraid of some thing or some place, I'm not talking. I'm just talking general, general fear. Let's say it's going first and volunteering to be first in the drill at a training session. The more that you avoid the first one, going first, you end up hating it more and more, or not wanting to do it more and more. So it becomes this really big fear versus jumping in there and feeling pretty good afterwards.
Yeah.
So if we look at shame, then that leads to the self-dislike, really. We don't like ourselves very much. And if we don't like ourselves very much, we don't think we're capable of very much. And we don't think we're capable of very much, we don't have ambition and enthusiasm. We have flatness of effect and we have poor motivation. And a lot of parents struggle with their kids' motivation, getting out of bed, etc., getting them to coaching sessions or whatever. And
Yeah,
then
expensive, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And then you do less. You run away and you're less ready for the opportunity that's just sitting right there. So it becomes a very tragic cycle.
But actually, for parents,
Mm,
it's probably quite an easy thing if you're focused on
totally.
that from a very young age, isn't it?
Totally. And I can't say enough to parents about understanding the importance of chores and responsibility early on for their youngsters.
Yeah.
And because it's very clear, the research on resilience is very clear. The kids that are resilient as teenagers were given chores as kids. Give them responsibility young, make sure the structure and the support's there so they know how, teach them, but then reasonably quickly step back and give them responsibility and let them make mistakes and let them learn how to look after things. I'm not, it's obviously within reason about their age and their stage. But if they can understand that what that does is it allows the psychology of the child to grow, maturity, self-reliance, the whole sense of having to think for themselves, to check things, to make sure they put things in the right place, that the animals are fed, the water's full, the cages are locked. So much happens in there that if they don't do that, someone else has done that for them, and then what we're actually doing is the opposite. We're building a self helplessness or dependency on others to do things, even the little things. So please, as parents, don't underestimate the power of letting them do the little things, and then make those little things bigger things as they become bigger people. And
Do you
then that
notice?
sorry,
Sorry, do you notice the difference? I imagine you get a lot of the athletes you worked with might
mm,
be late teens at the earliest, getting into their
yeah,
20s.
yes.
Can you see the difference between the athletes whose parents set them up in that way, as opposed to some who had perhaps didn't have those habits?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The maturity that you see of a young person come through that's had parents that's understood the old school,
Yep.
which is nicely becoming the new school again.
Goes in circles, doesn't it?
It sure does. It sure does. And so those that grew up in a time of great freedom and responsibility as a kid um, now understand that they may have taken that away from their own kids just because of the nature of, I guess, the climate and time.
Yep.
But certainly, you do, mate. And anywhere there's a team sport, also individual athletes, those that have had that early foundational um, that we just talked about, I guess that foundational setting and maturity and responsibility are different, are absolutely different humans.
Yep.
especially when it comes to coachability, stickability, learning, positivity, maturity, dealing with the hard times as well as the good times, not getting too caught up in the fantasy of things and staying pretty grounded. All of those things are seen in youngsters that have, come through parents that have asked them to be part of the family, not the centre of the family.
Yep.
And that's probably a good way to describe it, is they don't grow up as the centre of the universe. They grow up as part of a system that requires they have to contribute.
Absolutely.
Mm,
I want to talk about habits, and you've kind of touched on it a little bit now.
nice.
And one of my favorite quotes out of the book is, I've got it even written down here. It says, "One thing I've learned from decades of being immersed in the highest echelon of high performance sport is elite athletes are ordinary people doing extraordinary things."
Mm,
As an ordinary bloke myself, that's quite exciting to think I might be able to
mm,
do something extraordinary. But
totally.
but then you say that these extraordinary things come from extraordinary habits, and habits that have nothing to do with sport at all, but everything to do with the mind and soul.
Mm.
You probably mentioned a couple of them before, but what exactly are these habits that lead them to do extraordinary things?
Yeah, it's surprising how when we really sit back and sip on a coffee or a cup of tea, these things become common sense. Say those acts that are repeated each day because that's our way of doing things, or that reflects our integrity, or reflects who we are as a person and our identity. They build momentum over time, and there's no escaping that. Because a lot of people might say, "Oh, these people that they look at, they might criticize them for being too regimented or too um, boring, I guess, in their way, that have habits that they just do every day as part of their way."
Yep.
And they may say that they don't have their own, they're just more free and they don't have their own habits. But the reality is, everybody has a routine. When they wake up, they're either pushing the snooze button or they're getting up. Both of those are habits. And so you can see, if we just take what people do when the alarm goes off, or even if they set an alarm,
Yep.
it's more than likely someone who sets an alarm intentionally will also have their gear ready in the morning for what they're going to do first. So they're not only likely to get out of bed, they're likely to, do that with a bit of intention. So there's a couple of habits straight away. And people that might not, don't put their gear out, and they'll snooze one button and then they'll snooze the second one because they don't actually, or they might even get up on the second one, but none of their gear's ready. They might just mosey in and get a coffee or something. But you can see the whole system set up not to elicit or afford intention. It's actually to do nothing. Well, it's not to do nothing. They do something, but they're doing something which is the opposite of what we're talking about. It's a habit which is leaving people less invested in life. And so the habits that we're talking about, as simple as they are, create a momentum, repeated over time, days, weeks, months, also then create a psychology, which is that's where they're most comfortable. And so that's all it is a repeated behavior in a certain period of time becomes something something that's familiar.
Okay.
And as soon as it's become familiar, that's also where we're comfortable. So not to do it then becomes uncomfortable. And so you've got
Interesting.
this lovely double process happening, which is not only do you enjoy doing it and it's comfortable, but if you didn't do it, you'd be uncomfortable and you'd be thinking about why you hadn't done it. So it will drive you to go and do it. And so you can see that process psychologically as our friend if it's set up to habits which are, eat the right food, get up early, get to bed on time, good self-care, good planning, good organization, good connection with friends, good giving back, good arriving early. So
Yep.
all of those habits are, again, so simple, but create a momentum in the right way towards a goal, towards a dream, towards, a vision or whatever it might be. And then you can have the reverse of those, which just, essentially the bad habits, for me, by definition, steal your time.
Yep.
And so by participating in something which is what people would call a maladaptive or bad habit, it's simply a process that then you've lost that time. Let's say you don't get up till 10:30 instead of 5:30 or 6:30, so you've just lost 4 hours.
Yep.
Just from a simple habit of either pushing a snooze button or pushing the stop button and getting out of bed. That's as simple as it is understanding that you magnify that by a month, a year, 10 years. of losing 4 hours or 2 hours a day, or it's a chunk of time.
It's massive. And if
Yep.
whether you submit to the 10,000 hour rule and things like
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
it's lost time and what you could
Correct.
have been doing if you were fully committed, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so if people can understand it's not a complicated thing, but it's a very difficult thing. The discipline to do those simple things until it's ingrained in something that makes you feel uncomfortable not to do it takes some work. But
So do
every
you have a
day,
process, if you're working with someone who's struggling with that, do you have a process to try and ingrain those habits?
yeah, it's much easier to operate in that way that we're talking about from courage, because it's the courage that will lead to the plan, which will lead to the habits being set up with, bits and pieces that allow the habits to be more likely to happen. And so with the supporting it, parents can do this for their children as well, which is if they support them first and foremost to just reflect quietly on, I guess, and this is, it's a deep question, identity, or a deep topic. But if they can take some time to help the young person connect with, what makes them proud about themselves and what sort of person they are and who they connect with in their family that's like that and where that's come from, and fill them with some deeper knowing,
Yeah.
they're laying the foundations for courage. And so they're making courage part of, pride in themselves, a brave person. That's what makes them proud and those sorts of things. So it's about having that story about themselves or narrative that is themed like that. So automatically, because of what I talked about before, you're creating an energy that's going to be more likely to drive through on a positive habit. If people are struggling with those habits, it's more than likely what we've got underneath is a self-saboteur or a fear of failure, or feeling like they have to be perfect everywhere. And so they really are quite suffocated by the fear of getting things wrong or not being good enough. And so as soon as you've got that boiling away underneath, you're going to have bad habits and procrastination and avoidance all over the place, and running away from challenge and not wanting to put themselves out there and go for jobs or ask for a coaching possibility or try out for a team or go for a hard subject at school or think about a big university course. So all of those things that we see in our kids and really want to help them not do, you can see how the underpinning to all of it is courage or cowardliness or fear or courage. And so people that are lost in who they are and deep insecurity will then more than likely have bad habits, because it's the procrastination, it's the putting it off of that gives them a way out as well. Because if we think about it in a full circle, the bad habit then becomes a really easy excuse we can use later on when we feel stink that we didn't make much of our talent that we had as a kid. So let's say we're a really good musician, but we don't really kick on and we give up we don't play music for 10 years. As a 30-year-old, when you reflect back to how good you were as a teenager, you go, well, I get what you deserve, I guess. And I didn't practice that much. So I couldn't get myself to get out of bed and go to my lessons. So that's what it is. So you see how now you've made an excuse. There's just an example of it, but everyone has these excuses preset, and they often come from their bad habits, which then make them feel easier when they get to our age. That they didn't become a professional sportsman or create their first business or whatever it was. Excuses about what runs in the family or where they grew up or all those sorts of things are just things they have to accept, but they're not. They're just excuses they use into, which I can understand. It's not a judgment. It's that they feel sad that they didn't make of their life or aren't making of their life what it could be. And the mind doesn't like feeling that way, so it makes an excuse to take away those feelings. And so the bad habits have a couple of powerful roles. They help us feel better, and they need to steal our time. So in the end, we actually stop dreaming silly things and just settle for second best and be happy to be average and get on with things. So
Yeah.
that makes it really safe.
And there's some big time stealers in the world these days, right? A
Absolutely, these
distraction's
devices.
massive. And if you're
Mm,
trying to commit to something, I imagine as a teenager and you got so much going on,
mm.
you're getting into boys and girls stuff, but then there's the phone that's constantly
Oh,
dinging.
totally, totally. Yeah,
Um,
the devices are, not surprisingly, when we start to think about the layers of influence on socialization, are powerful machines that, the market and economy are using to shape people for sure.
yep. You talk about, and I've actually used this in my coaching, the green box.
Hmm.
Does that help with habit creation? What I
Yeah, that's
loved
certainly.
about it, and I called it the traffic light system
Mm,
with my players.
mm.
So obviously there's a red part, orange part, green part. What I loved and what they liked is that it was really visual. So maybe you could dig into that a little bit for us.
Yeah, I guess that came about many, many years ago. Just trying to help people see that what we're talking about around the habits creates a destiny. And it became a way for them to have a self-reflective moment about, where they were and what they were getting and what they were going to get.
Yep.
And it really, I wanted to break it down in a way that helped people see that, like you and I just said before, the fact that our habits are that powerful helps us as an ordinary person think, that, yeah, we can actually make a pretty cool life. And it was part of the conversation about, there is always a price to pay. There's always an in and an out, and if you don't put any in, you're not going to get any out. And someone who puts more in may not be as talented or skilled or whatever the word is as you, but they may get more out just because they've created better learning opportunities and they just got a little bit better at something. And so it was a lot of general conversations with athletes and people to help them start to see that there's something that we can monitor and we can look at and we can plan in a really basic form that seemed to be attached to long-term success. And it's certainly widely accepted around the world that long-term success is usually reflected in those that are most able to do the same thing for a very long period of time.
Yep.
And so that's what we just looked at within the conversations. It was, well, what would a green look like? What would an athlete look like who was truly invested, truly committed? And that's where that list came from. And then the red and the orange, or the red and the yellow. And then it really shifted from there to being something that leaders could use and coaches could use, and you can use in a process for the team, because you can identify those as an individual habit or as a collective habit.
Yep.
And then that's where it became a way to influence culture, in the red and green culture. And now it's no surprise that the way I coach people online is that you have the green, which is the courage path or pathway one.
Yep.
And then you have the red, which is the coward's way, which is pathway two. I use pathway one and pathway two less now, but it still really resonates with people. And so that red and green of the traffic light system, which I really like, Ben, that you've just, you extended it with and used it. It's a really good way to use it because the red and green's on the road for everyone to see wherever they go. It's red, yellow, green everywhere.
Yep.
And then I just help people see that the orange or the yellow was sort of that middle ground where they can look, they look, they're just middle of the pack. They don't look like they're lazy or sloppy, and they don't look like they're extreme. And so sadly, that orange is where most people are, because it's the fitting in quadrant. It's the fitting in part where I'm usually just on time,
Yep.
and I've usually just done my homework just good enough. So I'm
And
never.
they don't want to stand out.
They do. They never stand out for a green or sorry, they never stand out for a green or a red reason, and they just sit quietly in the masses. So it also helps us understand the Bell distribution curve of, our population. Most people are in the middle. It's like 68% of the population sits in the middle, and the same with a new team. No one in that group are good little soldiers,
Yep.
but they certainly don't step above the battlement very easily, and nor do they shirk very easily either. They always want to be part of the team, so they do work hard and they contribute well. But as soon as the training's cancelled, they're always very pleased. They're never upset.
Yep.
Like the green people, well, that was always a classic of a training for whatever reason was cut short or something happened. The green athlete was always very disappointed. Mhm.
You could quite clearly see, I've heard you speak about with the Chiefs, that
Mm.
when the more of the team was in the green,
Yeah,
you performed much better. And
yeah,
I think you
absolutely.
won, didn't you, those years? And
Yeah,
then the years after, it kind of tracked down perhaps into the more of the orange and more of the red, and
yeah,
simple
like I
habits had a
said,
huge effect.
correct. And the conversations, they're all good people, but certainly after we won 12 and 13, and conversations shifted from doing more to just, you know, again, for no other reason than just being human, wanting to do a little bit less to look after themselves. And then we've got to change straight away.
Yeah.
Mm.
I want to talk about the mop universe.
Yeah. Nice.
I love it. Like, and being a teacher at our school, we use the 7 habits of effective kids, and it's turned into eight
Nice.
habits now. Stephen
Nice.
Covey's
Yes.
work,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we always talk about finding the good, and we've seen incredible changes when you find the good in people. And maybe it comes back to that pride that you talked about earlier. I've also heard Scott Robertson talk about this, where he sort of said, "I spend 90% of my week looking for all the good
Mm.
parts of what everyone's doing."
Mm.
Is that what you find as well with your mock universe, with moments of perfection?
Yeah, it's a hard case that he said that because I first met him years and years ago, and it was just part of rugby, and I got to observe him coach some younger players. It's a long time. And my observation of him then was he was a coach that 90% of what he said was what was working,
Interesting.
and 10% of what he was talking about was where it hadn't worked, but he'd go there last, and then that would be a growth or a learning moment
Yep.
conversation. So it's fascinating that you've said he said that
Yeah.
90-10 because that's how I observed him, and well, that would have been 2008, 2009. So
So
long,
he
long
had it
time.
way back then. He'd obviously
Yeah, it's been
got
part of
onto it then.
how he took. So that really makes sense to me. So that's lovely to hear. Um, oh, look, it's one of those lock-ins where people believe for us to grow, we have to look at our errors and mistakes.
Yeah.
And most parents think that. Most parents think that you've got to pull your kids up on what's done wrong for them to do what's right. That's just simply not true. Um, we know that the best way of learning often for people is the old apprentice model. Now, the old apprentice model, whether it's electrician or a builder or plumber or whatever it was, surgeon, you get paired up with someone who's really really good at it, like super good at it, and you watch them,
Totally.
and then they,
I came out of university to
yeah,
go into teaching, and I
yeah,
had no idea what I was
yeah,
doing.
yeah,
And I spent 3 weeks with two of the most brilliant teachers, and still to this day,
yeah,
use,
learn
15,
more there.
16 years later, that's what I use, not what I learned on my course.
Yep,
But yeah,
yep. So if we take that, the common sense, we know that old school knows that.
yep,
Humanity knows that. That's what we've done forever. And so I guess if we can understand that, then there's some reason for us to think about how we apply that. And then it's also understanding where we put our attention is where our energy goes. And that's no fluffy duffy sort of comment. It's a reality that where we pay attention is where
yep,
energy is then focused into that particular thing. And so where we put our attention, our energy goes, which then increase. And this is the psychology underneath all of this is that as funny as it sounds, my understanding is there's only one bona fide law of psychology. The rest are just theories, just people's ideas.
okay,
The one that's moved to a point to beyond an idea, which is proven as a fact, is what we pay attention to increases the chance it will occur again. Common sense. What we pay attention to increases the chance it will occur again. So if we want a kid to do the right thing, look for it,
yep,
pay attention to it, comment on it, ask inquiring questions about it, get them to think about how they got that to happen, help them teach you how they did that. You spend your life doing that, and you are doing an amazing service to humanity. So that's the essence of mock universe, moments of perfection. And people go, oh, but there's no such thing as perfection. It's not true. There's perfection all the time. Like you look at a sunrise, every morning a sunrise, every day the sunset. When you look at it, you're like, wow. And then we watch a really nice one. People are like, oh, click, 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 click with their phones, right? That's clearly a moment that think's pretty perfect.
yep.
And so there are perfect things happening all the time, even if it's the smallest shift with a new skill. And then it goes to custard. But there was a little moment where it was going the right direction. So you can see how that's a real discipline to shift outside the mainstream, which is trial and error learning. Stop them when they get it wrong. Get them to tell you about all the things that went wrong. Show them the first video clips of what went wrong. Underline it with a red pen. Put a cross through it. Make them repeat their spelling list 400 times, even though they've only got 3 wrong but 37 right. They still make them really do the list. They got 3 wrong because apparently they're supposed to have only 2 wrong. So you see the system set up in a way where it assumes and believes that the best way to learn is trial and error. and then to teach them off the learn of the era. So the irony is, even if we do a trial and error, which is moments of S, MOS versus MOP, so moments of friction versus moments of S, right? Um, that's what I found is that if a coach was heavy in showing errors, and then they planned the training with the team, and then went out and hit the grass with a plan, the coach had done MOPs and only looked at what was working, and then built a plan for training. When they hit the grass, they did exactly the same thing. So I thought, isn't that ironic? We have a choice to go through where it's working and build our training plan, or we have a choice to go through where it isn't working and build our training plan. And then when we start to train and then practice, it always looks the same. A coach that's deeply, and a parent that's deeply anchored in looking for examples of it working, usually have a long-term plan they're operating by.
Yeah.
So they know where they want the kids to be in 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, this year, this campaign.
Beginning with the end in mind, right?
Beginning with the
Yeah.
end in mind. It takes a lot more work because it's much easier as a coach to try and just to take one mistake and fix it to get ready for this weekend. That's all the energy they have to do. That's all the prep they have to do. It's all the planning they have to do. It's all the thinking they have to do. So it's always easy to be a parent or a teacher or a coach that just operates off fixing mistakes. But growing a kid, growing an athlete, that's a PhD, man. That's a whole different philosophy. You are now looking at mastery. You're looking at the whole kid. You're looking at time. Where do you want them in 5 years? Where do you want them in 10 years? Those sorts of questions we don't ask enough for education or sport because it allows us to relax, allows us to relax. Now, if you take secondary school education, if we ask that question, where do we want them to be at 18, 19 years old? It's always going to be a conversation of morals
Yep.
and contribution to community. And yet, third form, boom, math, English, science, physics, chemistry, biology. But what if we just stopped all academics for a year and just went identity and community service for 1 year? And the whole class had to do that themselves.
I was actually having a exact conversation with my wife the other day because our boys are
Mm.
going through high school and
Yeah.
struggling with it. And I think it circles back to what you said around the apprenticeship model and
Mm.
having that mentor. But our mentors within some of these realms, high school are focused on teaching to a test. Coaches are focused on, I got to win this game. Yeah, I want to
Mm.
develop these kids, but
Mm.
I want to win this game this weekend. And I
Correct.
used to talk with my coaches about it all the time. But where do you want them to be at the end of this year? And where do you want them to be when
Yeah.
these kids are 12? Where do you want
Yeah.
them to be? What do you want them to be able to do when they're 16? And who do you want them to
Correct.
be as people?
Correct.
And it can be tough to get that through.
Yeah.
And so I think if I come back to that apprenticeship model, if that's so important, is it important for our youth athletes to have a positive mentor around?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Like I like parents to be parents. Um, I think you mentioned that in some of the prep work for me for today is that
Yeah,
often the mentor, if it can be outside the direct family and someone that knows the space in sport and life, it's incredibly powerful because it also allows parents and uncles and aunties just to be parents, uncles and aunties. They're going to be mentors too, but what we're talking about is someone that understands the space. They've got 20 years of experience that they can then impart upon a teenager that's ready for those conversations in a year and 5 year block if they mentor them for a period of time. So it's no brainer that most successful athletes and most successful people in life prioritize mentorship
yeah,
and they surround themselves by people that they are really fond of and usually become fond of as well. Um, but those people serve a purpose where they have, they're there to ask them hard questions and they're there to get their mirror and ask them to explain why they're doing X, Y, and Z and then to give advice. There's something very powerful in an older person or someone who's very experienced giving advice to a youngster but doing advice in a way which isn't telling them how to, telling them how to do up their laces. You'd be asking them how you do your laces up and why you do your laces up like that. Have they thought about this? So there's also type of mentor because some people are probably too talky and too telling to teenagers.
yeah.
And again, if you're talking too much, they're not thinking very much. We want to be making them think, man.
Yeah, we used to run off the 10-second rule. If I've been talking for 10 seconds,
Yeah,
more than 10
totally.
seconds, they're looking out the window already.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and good mentors usually ask good questions.
Yeah,
And you don't have to be a PhD, Albert Einstein, to ask a good question. You just have to be curious and invested.
totally.
Yeah,
But someone who's been through that pathway before
that's right.
will understand what those
That's right.
questions are, won't they?
Yeah, and then asking someone why they do what they do is a powerful, that's a powerful relationship because there's no judgment in that. You're just asking a curiosity.
Yeah.
But not very often our youngsters get asked why they do what they do, just get told what to do until it becomes automatic and robotic, and then their first answer is, I don't know.
And then we wonder
Yeah,
why they can't think for themselves.
and that's right.
Yep,
Exactly. Yeah.
totally. Hey,
Mm.
David, we are coming towards the end of it,
Mm.
and we like to finish the show with four quick questions for you, if that's all right.
Absolutely, Ben. Yeah.
Number one, for parents of youth athletes, what does one do and one don't?
If they can think about the sport as a family outing, and then ask themselves, if I was going to the beach to go surfing with my kids, what it look like I'm going to look as I go off to training for footy. If the answer is no, they've got it wrong.
Yep.
When they're preparing to go to Sunday, Saturday sport with their kids, the feeling in the car and the feeling when they wake up should be like they're about to go to the best beach in the world. So that's what you do. Yeah, just ask yourself that simple question. And then that can shape everything, shape what you pack in the car, shape what food you take. This everything, who's put the picnic blanket in? Right. That becomes the focus, right? Now automatically you're setting that up with your kids to have a good time. Um,
Brilliant.
I think that what you don't do is I reckon there's just be mindful about talking too much, like we just said before. I think a lot of parents talk too much to their kids and they turn the tension up on anxiety on their kids by asking, focusing them, telling them to be grown up and all these sorts of things. So I think don't force your kids to grow up too soon. Understand that I reckon that the best principle that they can bring through to elite sport is the love of play. And so just be mindful of getting too friggin' serious. There's too many serious parents out there that pop on the sidelines and they're popping in the car and they're hard out on the way to trying to make the kids focus and get clear on the goals and the game plans. And then on the way home, they're like, "What did you do that for? And why did you do that for? And why were you thinking that moment?" And then it's just that's a I know they mean well, but that's just I get stuck for words because it's such a powerful thing. So if they can understand that we want, for me, it's ironic to think that, but we said at the very beginning, if an athlete can come through from a culture of chores and responsibility, if they can come through from a culture of play. So that's just going to set them up to love what they're doing, love who they're doing it with more than likely, and just grow massively,
Yeah.
especially under pressure, because they'll dance with pressure, they'll love pressure because it's opportunity. Pressure's there, and people try and get rid of it and just turn it down or talk it away. But what we're talking about is they love it.
Oh, I love that you use surfing.
Mm.
And I think one of the greatest things when you go to the beach is seeing like the 80-year-old guy on
Yeah,
the
yeah,
enormous surfboard who's
yeah,
still doing what he loves.
yeah.
But often you don't see that with other sports because kids have given it away,
Yeah,
right?
I love it. That's right. And
Yeah.
that's what's happened. That's what happens. It's become painful. It's become aversive, and then they stop. Not, I don't know why. They'll say they enjoy it, but they don't. It's become painful.
Yeah. Okay, so what about youth athletes? The athletes themselves going through that youth pathway, one
Mm.
do, one don't.
Um, I think one is have interests outside of the sport. So if you've got friends that are in your sport, see if you can make friends who are outside your sport.
Mm.
So if you're a professional, let's say you wanted to be a professional soccer player, that's sweet. But go and have a friend that loves music. Just get some variability through your friend network so that's not all your sport and all your way of life and it's the only way that you see the world.
Yep.
So I think really be really open to be curious and that will always come from having friends that are, different. So I think that's one key thing is look for some points of difference to help keep your worldview wide.
Yep.
Um,
Become a well-rounded person.
Yep. And number two, don't ever lose the rebellious teenager, the adolescent that questions things and challenges things and asks questions. I think that's a key bit that we often make these teenagers into robots.
Yep.
Certainly do it with the deep respect and politeness, but please keep alive, the rebellious adolescent that is trying to find a better way to do something.
It's
Because
really interesting. Oh, my
yeah,
son is that child,
oh,
and
good,
16, and he has absolutely no fear in the classroom about questioning any teacher about
yeah,
anything.
good,
And we've had a number of calls about it, and student
yeah,
interviews go, interestingly, they either love him or hate him. There's
yeah,
nothing in the middle.
that's right.
But we have these discussions at home around you need to do it respectfully,
Mm,
but I actually like that you question people.
totally,
That's going to
totally.
serve you really well in life. It's a little bit awkward now.
Yeah,
Don't stop it, but yeah, maybe
yeah.
reframe it slightly.
There is a dance that we have to do because we understand that as soon as an adolescent does that to an adult that hasn't got their maturity and self-acceptance sorted, as they feel threatened,
Oh, yes, and we've
and
seen
then
that.
and then they just then drop into control and tell the kid they should do as do as they're told, and they shouldn't be doing that. And it
Yep,
happens in sport too because it's coaches. And again, I appreciate that my coaches are really good, well-meaning people, but unless you've got your maturity sorted and you're doing it for love of play, you can have some real damage.
yeah, yeah,
Mm. Yep.
absolutely.
So that's
We're
what I'd
living
say.
it at the moment.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah, yeah. Cool.
yep, totally. Hey, look, do you have, not allowed to use one of your own
Hmm.
tools or resources, one book, tool, or resource that is not yours that you recommend for parents and or athletes?
Oh, look, I love encouraging kids just to read a bit of fiction. And one, like for me, I love The Hobbit. I loved The Hobbit when I was young. I love that sort of fiction that, of course, allows us to step into some fantasy world
Yep,
and be young. My favorite movie is The Polar Express.
yep,
So
brilliant.
books that sort of have that sort of theme that allow us just to be silly and dream and enjoy that sort of stuff. I think if the older adolescents and maybe adults, yeah, I think parents, that never feel less to read a kid's book.
Oh, I'm a picture book guy through and through.
Yeah, I love Winnie
They're
the Pooh.
phenomenal.
Yeah, that's right. So I love all of those. I love that. The boy, the horse, and the mole. Or I think there's a beautiful picture book.
Yep, another one you
There's
mean.
these. So I love books that encourage us to dream, and tell stories. I love
Fantastic.
a guy called Paulo Coelho.
Yep, I know who you mean. Yep.
I think that's how you pronounce his name. Apologies if I've got that wrong, but
The
he is a
Alchemist.
prolific, yes,
Yep.
yes, a prolific writer. He has a lot of adult stuff, but a lot of stuff in there too is just, again, just allowing the mind to have to do some bends and twists and pole vaults and
Yep.
somersaults and think about things. Um, so there's, depending on whether it's what's developmental stage the children are at, kids books, adventure books. I used to enjoy the Famous Five, Harry Potter's, all of these things that encourage fantasy, and you know, I think that's really important. So the whole sense of play, and the books I'd be encouraging are those that encourage fantasy and wider thinking. Mm.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Love it. Love it.
cool, cool,
Lastly, mate, I've gotten so much out of your book and your podcast and the
wickers,
resources
wickers.
of yours over the years. If any of our listeners want to find any of your work, where can they find it?
Yeah, look, they just follow it. The Google will find me. Um, so they just need to punch in my name into Google and go sports psychology, and they'll find my website,
Yep.
and then they can get everything they need off there. So it's yeah, that's all there for them.
Brilliant. Perfect
Yeah.
way to end. David, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, Ben, thank you too, mate. I really enjoyed the chat. It was a refreshing opportunity for me to step back a little bit in time and look at some of that stuff which I haven't visited, like I did back then when I was putting it all together in the book. So thank you for the thrill.
Hey, I hope you loved that as much as I did. I could speak with David for absolute hours. He's such an interesting man who who's able to dive right into what is really important. And I love how the majority of his chat comes back to having a strong identity and becoming that individual you really want to become, which is built around courage, and all of that drives towards success. Look, if you want to find out more about his work, and there's some things we didn't get to, I'd love to really get into the actual process that he uses and steps people through. to develop that identity and build more courage. And so I'll work to get him on again where we can talk about that. But if you would like to search out a bit more of information about him, we will put some links in our show notes. Like you said, you can Google him. It's all there. It's actually really accessible. His book, Unleashing Greatness, is fantastic. Um, get on, find that, read it. If you prefer to watch your content rather than just listen to it, we have our YouTube channel. You can search up the podcast on there. We have our weekly newsletter. Sign up to that. We break down some of these podcasts in there, and then we have themes and topics all around youth sport development. It helps athletes, it helps coaches, it really helps parents as well. We're bringing on some more guests in the next few weeks. We're super excited about some of the names we have, so look out for those, and we will talk with you soon.